I died a slow, silent death the first time, poisoned by the man I called my husband, betrayed by the woman I called my daughter-in-law. But fate gave me a second chance. This time I won't beg. I won't forgive. I'll expose every lie, reverse every trap, and burn down the house they built on my grave. They thought I was weak. They forgot I remembered everything. I once believed I would die surrounded by the people I loved. Not like this. I could barely breathe. The pill Alyssa gave me was still lodged somewhere in my throat, melting like acid. My vision swam. I was suffocating on the inside. The pain was sharp, sharper than I'd imagined death would be. Victor caught me as I stumbled forward. "Careful," he whispered, his tone honeyed. But his smile, God, that smile, froze my blood. Finally it slipped. The mask. "After 30 years, he said under his breath, "I'm finally free of you. And Caleb is out of the way too. My son. He had died just a week ago in a car accident. The shock had nearly killed me. I hadn't even been able to bury him. There was nothing left to bury. I choked on a sob, but my lungs refused to work. My limbs were heavy, my chest screaming. I reached for something, anything, but Alyssa just stood there, her arms folded. Victor turned toward her with a tender look, the kind I hadn't seen in years. "From now on," he said, brushing her hair back, "the three of us can finally live in peace. The three of them. Me." I was no longer part of the equation. Tears streamed down my face as I crumpled to the floor. I wanted to scream. Curse them. Spit blood in Victor's face. But I couldn't move. His voice echoed in my ears. "I've been swapping your medication for months. The police won't find a thing." The darkness pulled at me. My last thought, soaked in anguish, was of Caleb's bright smile, his boyish voice saying, "Love you, Mom." He was gone. And now I would be too. Everything went still. Until a baby's cry pierced the air. Then the room snapped into focus. Bright hospital lights, white sheets, the sting of antiseptic. What? My lungs filled with air, real air. Not the suffocating wheeze from moments ago. I blinked. Alyssa was on a delivery bed. Her face flushed, her brow damp with sweat. Victor stood beside her, holding her hand. And Caleb was alive. He stood just a few feet away, peering into a bassinet, smiling. I gasped. "Mrs. Blackwood, are you all right?" a nurse beside me asked. "You looked pale for a second." Yes," I said weakly, staring around. How was this possible? Was I dreaming? Oh, everything was too vivid. Too sharp. I could smell blood and bleach, hear the beeping of monitors, feel the chill in the air. This wasn't a dream. I had come back. To the day Alyssa gave birth. Victor stood across the room now, arms crossed. His eyes were fixed on the baby in a way that made my skin crawl. He was supposed to hate children. But his gaze was intimate. Alyssa looked down at the baby, then cooed, "Look at him. His eyes are just like Caleb's." The baby was red-faced, barely opening his eyes. I narrowed mine. Oh, they weren't. There was nothing in that tiny face that resembled Caleb. Not his jawline, his nose, or his soft features as a child. Nothing. Till Caleb smiled. "He's perfect." I took a step closer, pretending to admire the newborn. Victor hovered like a hawk. I glanced up. His eyes locked with mine. He smiled. Too sweet. Too hollow. They thought I was the same woman from before. Weak. Blinded by grief. Ripe for manipulation. But I wasn't. Not anymore. In my last life I had missed the signs. The glances exchanged between Victor and Alyssa. The way he doted on the baby, the coldness that followed Caleb's death. This time I would see everything. And I would not die again quietly. They still thought I was helpless. That I was the grieving widow-to-be with a weak heart and failing memory. Too old and too dazed to question anything. That same illusion had killed me once. They wouldn't get that luxury twice. After the delivery, Caleb doted on the newborn like he had in my past life. His eyes sparkled with love. He took photos. Changed diapers. Bragged to the nurses. He had no idea the child he cradled with such care didn't carry a drop of his blood. And Victor played his part well, hovering in the background, ever the attentive father-in-law. He fetched water. Held Alyssa's hand. Placed a pillow behind her back with a tenderness that once belonged to me. I watched them from the hospital armchair, my smile mild, my hands folded neatly. Inside I was a storm. That night, when the nurses had done their rounds and Alyssa and Caleb were asleep, I stood up slowly, The baby's crib sat near the window, bathed in moonlight. I walked to it, heart beating fast. The baby stirred, his tiny fists clenching. I reached into my purse and pulled out a sterile cotton swab I had hidden earlier. Gently, I opened the baby's mouth and swabbed his inner cheek. He whimpered. "Shoo," I murmured, rocking the crib gently. Behind me I heard movement. "Mom." Caleb's voice, soft but groggy. I turned, calmly pocketing the sample. "He seemed hungry," I said. "Probably just needs his mother." Caleb nodded and picked the baby up, handing him to Alyssa. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. By morning I had collected 2 more samples. Victor's from the brush he left in his hospital bag and Caleb's from a used tissue I retrieved after breakfast. That afternoon, while pretending to run an errand, I took all 3 samples to a private laboratory on the other side of the city. An old contact of mine still worked there. He owed me a favor from long ago, back when I had funded the place during its startup years. "Rush this," I said, slipping an envelope across the counter. "Confidential. No names." He glanced at the samples, then at me. "You'll have it in 3 days." "Perfect." That night Victor brought me my pills. As always. "Here," he said, handing me the tiny white capsules in the bottle cap. 3 tonight. You've been overdoing it." I nodded. Smiled weakly. I placed them on my tongue, took a sip of water and tilted my head back. He watched me swallow. Then he left the room. I stood. Walked to the bathroom. Spat the pills into a tissue. I flushed them. Every single one. Just like I had done before they killed me last time. Victor thought he had complete control over my medication routine. He was wrong. The next morning when he left for work and the housekeeper arrived, I pretended to run an errand and instead visited a nearby toxicology lab. There, I handed over samples of all the pills Victor had been giving me. "I'd like a chemical analysis," I told the technician. "Test for interactions as well. And please make sure it's comprehensive." He raised an eyebrow but didn't question me. "Results in 5 days." That evening I returned home early. Caleb was with Alyssa and the baby. Victor was still at work. I wandered into the living room and looked at the walls of family photos. So many smiles. So many lies. I used to see a happy life in those pictures. Now I saw a gallery of betrayal. 3 days later the first report came in. I returned to the lab, my hands shaking slightly as I took the envelope. Inside were 3 pages. 3 damning, irreversible pages. I sat in my car and read them one by one. Conclusion. The child is not biologically related to Caleb Blackwood. The child is a direct paternal match to Victor Blackwood. I stared at the words until my vision blurred. My hands clenched. Victor. The man who had stood at my wedding. The man who had promised to love me in sickness and in health. He had seduced our daughter-in-law. He had fathered a child with her. And now, he was grooming Caleb to raise that child as his own. In my last life, I dismissed Victor's sudden warmth toward Alyssa as grandfatherly affection. When he had doted on the baby, I thought he was making up for years of distance. But this wasn't grandfatherly love. This was ownership, possession, and murder. I clutched the report to my chest, staring into the rearview mirror of my car. Not again. This time I wouldn't wait to be silenced. 2 days later, the results from the medication test arrived. I sat in the same toxicology lab, my heart pounding as the technician handed me the file. "These medications are fine on their own," he said carefully. "But mixed in the combinations you've listed, the dosages and frequency, they become volatile. You're looking at potential heart failure within weeks. Maybe sooner." I pressed my palm to the counter to keep from swaying. "Thank you," I said quietly and walked out. When I returned home, Victor was already there. He greeted me with a kiss on the cheek. "How was your day?" he asked, so gentle. "So perfect." "Tired?" "A little," I replied. He smiled, then went to prepare my pills again. The image of the toxicology report flashed through my mind. Victor's hand placing the pills in the cap. His voice, guiding me with dosage instructions. His eyes watching me swallow. "Here," he said now, returning to me with a glass of water. "Thank you," I murmured. He watched me as I placed the pills on my tongue. I smiled, then tilted my head and swallowed. He didn't know I had tucked them under my tongue and later dropped them into the potted plant beside my chair. That night I sat on my bed holding both reports in my hand. One confirmed the baby wasn't Caleb's. The other confirmed Victor was slowly poisoning me to death. Just like before. But now I had evidence. And I had time. This time I would not confront them in rage or tears. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't beg. I would make them rot from the inside out just as they did to me. I slipped both reports into a hidden file beneath the false bottom of my drawer and climbed into bed. Victor lay beside me, scrolling through his phone like an ordinary husband. I turned away from him, eyes open in the dark. If he reached out to touch me tonight, I wouldn't flinch. I would let him. I would be the perfect wife. The loyal, grieving mother. The harmless matriarch. And when the time came, I'd bury him with a smile. It was amazing how easy it was to make someone like Alyssa feel secure. People like her, pretty, spoiled, and sly, were always convinced that the world revolved around them. She thought she had fooled me, seduced my husband, and stolen my son's future without consequence. All I had to do was let her believe that for a little while longer. The first step. Letting her think I was still the same fragile Miriam Blackwood. "Mother," Alyssa said sweetly as we shared tea in the sunroom. "You really shouldn't exert yourself so much. Caleb and I can handle the company when the time comes." I offered her a warm, shaky smile. "Of course, darling. I'm just trying to get my affairs in order." She leaned in like a caring daughter-in-law. "What sort of affairs?" "The will," I said with a sigh heavy enough to make it look real. "It's time to update it." Alyssa stiffened just slightly. I noticed it, how her fingers paused mid-stir over the sugar bowl. "Oh, do you need help with that?" "I do actually," I said, lowering my gaze like a weary old woman. "I want to ensure that the baby is taken care of. Caleb might treat you well now, but no one can predict the future. Not even husbands." Her eyes sparked. I didn't need a DNA report to manipulate Alyssa. All she needed was hope, false, glimmering hope that she could keep the fortune and the facade. "And I suppose," I added with a soft sigh, "your child will be managing Victor's portion of the shares. With you acting as trustee until he comes of age, of course." Alyssa blinked. "You would do that? For me?" "For the baby," I said gently. "You're the mother of this family's only heir now." I didn't say whose heir he was. I didn't need to. She saw only dollar signs. That night I made a quiet visit to the law office I had worked with for years. Mr. Grayson, my longtime attorney, blinked when I entered. "Mrs. Blackwood, I wasn't expecting you." "I know," I said, placing the envelope of documents on his desk. "It's time to revise my will." "I see," he said cautiously. "And the changes?" "Victor's half," I said slowly, "goes to my grandson, managed by Alyssa Moore until he's 18. He hesitated. "Should I notify Mr. Blackwood?" "No," I replied calmly. "This is just between us. For now." He nodded, understanding that tone in my voice. A tone I hadn't used in decades. I signed the documents with a firm stroke of the pen. The old Miriam Blackwood would have hesitated. The new one didn't. Back at the house, I found Victor in his study, pretending to read. He looked up the moment I entered. "You were out late," he said. I smiled. "Ran into a few errands. I had to visit the tailor, then stopped by the florist. Time flies." He looked unconvinced. "Good. Let him doubt. Let him stew. Soon I'd feed him something else to worry about." The next morning I handed Alyssa a brochure for a luxury beauty spa. "You've done so much," I said kindly. "I want to treat you." Alyssa's eyes widened. "Really?" "I made you an appointment for tomorrow," I said. "Massages, facials, the works." While she gushed her thanks and played the grateful daughter-in-law, I slipped my phone into my bag and drove to Blackwood Holdings. It had been years since I stepped foot in the company's marble lobby. Most of the staff barely remembered me. Victor had made sure of that. He'd preferred I stay at home, tucked neatly into the role of obedient wife. Today I was done being tucked away. The general manager, Paul Reiner, greeted me in the conference room. He was in his early 50s now, the son of a man who once worked for my father. "I must say, Mrs. Blackwood, it's an honor to see you back." "Just call me Miriam, Paul," I said, waving a hand dismissively. "I want a full report on Victor's current responsibilities. Budgets, project proposals, any pending disciplinary matters. And I'd like to sit in on next week's shareholder meeting." Paul blinked. "Does Mr. Blackwood know about this?" "He will," I said calmly. "In time." His jaw tensed, but he nodded. Of course. I'll have the files sent to your home. As I walked through the corridors of my family's company, past secretaries and managers and investors, all of them assuming I was merely a relic of the past, I felt something rise in me. This place belonged to me before it ever belonged to Victor. My father had built it brick by brick. And I had let a snake slither into its walls. No more. Victor came home early that day. I was in the kitchen when he stepped in, fuming. What the hell were you doing at the office? I turned, wiping my hands with a tea towel. Oh. Who told you I was there? The general manager. Paul is so loyal, I murmured. How nice. He stepped forward, tense. Miriam, you're not well. You shouldn't overexert yourself. You've been pushing too hard. That stress can be dangerous for someone in your condition. I tilted my head. Yes, and with the wrong pills it could kill me. He stiffened. I added with a sweet smile, I should be careful with my medications, right? His eyes narrowed. The game had begun. Later that night I watched as Victor poured my usual pills into the cap. He handed me the glass of water, eyes sharp. Here, he said. I took the pills, placed them on my tongue. Swallowed. He watched. I smiled. He left. And I spat them into the houseplant just as always. The next day I met Alyssa at a quiet cafe. Cozy, upscale, the type of place she liked to post about on social media. She arrived in a fresh sundress, hair curled, face flushed with excitement. Thank you again, Mother, she said, setting her purse on the table. That spa was heavenly. I'm glad, I replied. The waiter brought our drinks and we sipped in silence for a moment. Then I pulled out a folder and placed it on the table. Alyssa blinked. What's that? I've been doing some thinking, I said slowly. Victor's been staying late at work a lot. Don't you think so? Her expression faltered. I know how men like him operate, I added, opening the folder just a crack. Inside were carefully staged photos. Victor standing suspiciously close to a younger woman, the angle just ambiguous enough to create doubt. She wasn't real. She was one of my house staff in disguise. But Alyssa didn't know that. Alyssa's mouth parted slightly as she stared at the photos. No, she muttered. He wouldn't. I reached across and touched her hand. I just wanted to prepare you, I said softly. That's why I made those changes to the will. So that no matter what happens, your child is protected. And you too. Her eyes gleamed, not with gratitude but with possession. Exactly as I intended. She smiled at me for the first time that day. And I knew I had her completely. Back at home, Victor was pacing in the backyard when I returned. His voice was low when he caught me by the arm. What are you doing? I don't know what you mean, I said innocently. You've been visiting lawyers. The company. Planting seeds in Alyssa's head. What are you up to, Miriam? I looked him dead in the eyes. You always did hate when I took an interest in your affairs. You preferred me docile. He didn't respond. I smiled. I just want peace in our family. Victor didn't trust me. Not anymore. But he couldn't prove anything yet, and that was what made him dangerous. Still, he didn't realize how much danger he was in. Because while Victor watched me with growing paranoia and Alyssa dreamed of securing the fortune, I held every string in my hands. And I was just getting started. There are only so many times you can smile through poison before it turns into resolve. Victor was restless lately, less polished, more tightly wound. He smiled too hard. Slept too lightly. Every time I stepped into a room, his eyes followed me like a guard dog watching a locked gate. He knew something had changed. He just didn't know what. Not yet. One night, just past 1 a.m., I heard the floorboards creak outside my room. I opened my eyes and waited. The door to our bedroom clicked softly as Victor slipped out. I reached beneath my mattress and pulled out a Bluetooth earpiece, linking it to the hidden surveillance system I had installed throughout the house. After visiting the toxicology lab, I'd used a day Victor was too busy for lunch to outfit the study, the guest room, and even his walk-in closet with micro-recorders and button cams. Victor's study, his sanctum, was my main target. No one was allowed in there. Not even the cleaning staff. And tonight it was buzzing. I tapped the receiver. We need to act fast, Victor whispered. Another voice responded. Alyssa's trembling. You mean now? Already. Do you want to keep playing happy family while that idiot raises my son? Victor hissed. He's starting to ask questions. I don't like it. There was a pause. Then Alyssa muttered, what if something goes wrong? Victor grabbed her by the chin. I could hear the roughness in his breath. You better remember, Alyssa. Me. The baby. We're the only real family here. He added coldly, set it up with the mechanic tomorrow. I'll take care of the rest. I pulled the earpiece out slowly, fingers trembling. So it was happening again. They were going to kill Caleb just like they had in my previous life. Same method. Same players. But not the same outcome. Not this time. The next morning, Caleb was at the breakfast table, holding the baby while Alyssa scrolled through her phone. You really need to take your car in for service, she said suddenly, almost snapping. I've told you a dozen times, Caleb. I will, he replied lazily, spooning oatmeal into the baby's mouth. I've been busy. I already booked it for you, she said too quickly. You leave for your trip tomorrow. Just drop it off today. Victor entered then, unusually quiet, sipping coffee. I watched him over the rim of my teacup. He hadn't slept well. His hands twitched with impatience. The trap was set. That afternoon I found Caleb in the driveway, keys in hand, phone pressed to his ear. Going to the auto shop? I asked casually. Yeah, he said. Apparently the brakes are acting up. Alyssa keeps nagging me to get it looked at. She's right, I replied, keeping my voice even. But take her car instead. Yours is low on gas. He looked confused. You sure? I'll have Martha fill it tomorrow. He nodded. All right. Saves me a stop. And just like that I swapped fate. The crash came 3 hours later. Alyssa had decided to go for a drive after Caleb left. She had her hair done, bought herself a new lipstick and taken her usual vanity selfies. Only this time she never made it back. Her car flipped on a city road after slamming into a concrete barrier. The brakes had failed completely. She was rushed to the hospital. I arrived 10 minutes before Victor. She was unrecognizable, half her face swelled and blistered. Her right leg was mangled, bones broken and wrapped in steel rods. The doctor whispered words like concussion, nerve damage, severe scarring. Victor stormed in and pushed past the nurse. He stopped dead in his tracks at the sight of her. I stood beside her bed, hands neatly folded. She's stable, I said gently. But the injuries are extensive. He didn't speak. Didn't have to. Outside in the waiting area, Caleb was pacing. Why did she take my car? He asked, confused. She told me to drive it to the mechanic, but then she took it herself. Victor was pale. I thought, she wasn't driving today. I let out a soft chuckle. Why does it matter which car she took, Victor? His head snapped toward me. You seem unusually interested. I'm just making conversation, I replied sweetly. His lips parted but nothing came out. An hour later the police arrived. A routine investigation. Accidents required paperwork. Paperwork required truth. Victor stepped aside, flustered, talking in hushed tones to the officers. He didn't realize it yet, but the mechanic he and Alyssa bribed had been under pressure ever since a different customer's incident had opened an internal probe. And that mechanic. He'd recorded everything. That night back at home, Caleb sat on the porch alone, smoking. He hadn't smoked since college. I joined him silently, letting the cool air wash over us. He glanced at me. I don't care about Alyssa anymore. But why would Dad? He stopped. I let the silence stretch, then said, because she lied to you. He turned to me sharply. She lied about the child, I continued. He isn't yours. He froze. The cigarette burned down to his fingers before he flicked it away. That's not possible. I pulled the DNA results from my coat pocket and handed them to him. He read them in stunned silence. No biological relation between the child and Caleb Blackwood, he read aloud. But... His voice cracked. I wanted to wait, I said gently. Until I was sure. Until you were safe. He dropped the paper and buried his head in his hands. In her hospital room, Alyssa woke 3 days later. The first words out of her mouth weren't about her injuries. They were about her face. Pie face, where's the mirror? The nurse tried to calm her, but she screamed until the staff sedated her again. I watched it all from my phone. Surveillance footage piped straight into my camera. I had paid the private nurse well. Discretion was part of the deal. When Alyssa came to again, 2 police officers were waiting by her bedside. They asked simple questions at first. Accident timeline, who had access to the car, the mechanic's name. Alyssa answered shakily. Then they showed her the audio file. The one with her voice giving exact instructions. The one where she told the mechanic to make sure it looks like an accident. She paled. Wait. I only said that once, she stammered. I never asked him to cut the brakes completely. One officer tilted his head. So you admit to ordering the brake tampering? Alyssa froze. I. Who gave the second order? The officer asked. We have 2 separate recordings. The first was yours. The second was a man's voice. Confident. He played the clip. Alyssa blinked. Then blinked again. He recognized it. Victor. Her eyes widened. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. She looked like she might faint. You said you'd handle it, she whispered to no one in particular. You said. The officer snapped his notebook shut. We'll be back later. Think carefully. The moment they left, Alyssa screamed into her pillow. Back home, Victor was trying to play it cool. But I knew him too well. He avoided me in the halls now. Talked on the phone in whispers. Left his study locked even more tightly. It didn't matter. I already had what I needed. Let him boil in suspicion. Let Alyssa rage in betrayal. Let Caleb mourn a lie. I was done mourning. Now I was collecting debts. And Victor Blackwood was first on my list. Alyssa had been disfigured, betrayed, and cornered by the police. But the one thing that terrified her most wasn't the law. It was Victor. She had seen through him now. She finally understood that the man who whispered promises into her ear had no loyalty. No heart. Just ambition and rage. And when she realized he had given the final kill order to the mechanic, the same one that almost killed her, everything cracked. Her fear turned to fury. All I had to do was give it one gentle nudge. That morning, I entered her hospital room with a warm smile and a thermos of soup. Homemade, I said softly. You must be tired of their bland food. Alyssa glanced at me warily from behind her bandages. Her lips were cracked, her hair a mess, but her eyes were sharp again. She was no longer pretending. Why are you here? She asked. Because we're family. She scoffed. Save the act. I sat anyway, setting the thermos on the side table. Then let's speak like enemies. She flinched. I saw the way you looked at Victor, I said calmly. And I know you've realized the truth. She didn't respond. I can help you, I continued, but only if you help yourself first. Still silence. Then she whispered. He said the baby would secure everything. I tilted my head. And yet he tried to kill you. Her mouth twisted. I let that hang in the air a moment longer, then handed her a photo from my purse. Alyssa took it with trembling hands. Her eyes widened. It was her. Leaning into the arms of another man outside a boutique hotel. Her ex. The one she cried about to the maids once after too many drinks. The one she said she never stopped loving. They were clearly close, hands intertwined, faces too near, oblivious to the world. I didn't plan for that to happen, she muttered. I took a sip of tea. Of course not. But I didn't cheat, she added quickly. It was just a talk. One night. I missed being loved. I leaned closer, my voice low and cold. Victor will not believe that. She blinked. And even if he does, I continued, he won't forgive it. You know what he's capable of. She stared down at the photo, her fingers curling around it. Why are you doing this? She asked bitterly. Because you destroyed my son, I replied. But I'd rather burn Victor first. That afternoon, I paid a quiet visit to a private testing clinic. I handed over a fabricated paternity report, one I had commissioned from an old friend in forensics who owed me a favor. It stated, no paternal match found between Victor Blackwood and subject child. Legally meaningless. Emotionally lethal. 2 hours later, Victor retrieved it himself. I made sure of that. I had told the clinic he'd be coming. By evening he was a volcano. I watched from the shadows of the hospital corridor as he stormed toward Alyssa's room, a file clutched in his hand like a dagger. I slipped in my earpiece and opened the hidden surveillance feed. The moment he stepped into the room, he threw the folder at her. What is this? He roared. Alyssa opened it and froze. You had one job, Victor growled. One. And you couldn't even do that. Wait, this isn't real. Don't lie to me, he shouted. He grabbed her by the arm, yanking her upright. The machines beeped wildly. The four-stand clattered. You filthy little tramp, he snarled. Who is it? Who did you sleep with? Alyssa slapped him. Hard. You're one to talk, she screamed. You nearly killed me. You were done with me the moment I lost my face. Victor's eyes blazed. You were cheating the whole time. You raped me, she spat, voice cracking. You threatened me, Victor. You said if I didn't marry Caleb you'd ruin me. He froze. You said you'd kill my father if I didn't obey, she gasped. You said if I ever told anyone. Shut up, he barked, lunging for her again. She scrambled back, one leg dragging uselessly. You can't have children, Victor. You blame me, but it's you. All your mistresses, and none of them ever gave you a son. He stopped. His face, usually calculated and cool, contorted. You're lying. You're barren, she hissed. That baby was never yours to begin with. That was when he snapped. He lunged, grabbing her by the throat. She screamed, hands flailing, knocking over the tray. A nurse outside the door screamed. Help. She's being attacked. Victor didn't stop. His eyes were wild, teeth bared, hands tightening as Alyssa choked beneath him. I sat in my car watching it all unfold. Finally, the house of cards was collapsing. Security pulled Victor off her minutes later. He fled, disappearing before the police arrived. A full murder investigation began the next morning. The hospital handed over surveillance footage, thanks to my subtle reminders that everything had been coincidentally recorded. Victor Blackwood was now a wanted fugitive. As news of the attack spread, so did the whispers. Dozens of women began to come forward. Former employees at Blackwood Holdings, house staff, distant acquaintances. They spoke of harassment, threats, coercion. Some even used the word rape. Others provided financial records. Documents Victor had embezzled, partnerships he had forced, kickbacks he had buried. The board held an emergency meeting. By noon the next day, Victor was stripped of every title, share, and connection to the company. Blackwood Holdings, my father's legacy, was finally free of him. Caleb didn't say a word for days. He stayed in his room, barely eating, staring at old photos of the baby that was never his. I didn't push him. Some wounds had to bleed before they could close. Instead, I handled the business. The hospital. The investigators. I gave interviews in quiet rooms, passed out press statements like weapons, and watched Victor's empire crumble in real time. Alyssa, still in the hospital. But her role was finished. The next act was mine. There are many ways to destroy a man. I chose the one that takes everything he ever pretended to be, and burns it in public. Victor Blackwood was once called the crown jewel of Blackwood Holdings. He was the man in tailored suits, giving speeches about legacy and family values. He charmed investors, seduced shareholders, and smiled for the press. Now he was a man on the run. The footage of him attacking Alyssa in her hospital room had aired twice before the media began circling. The hospital released a statement. The police opened a formal investigation. And overnight, everything he had built began to unravel. It didn't help that I made sure the unraveling was loud. Anonymous packages went out to every member of the board. HR reports that had once been buried. Accounts of harassment from interns, assistants, and event staff. Confidential documents proving embezzlement, kickbacks, even hush payments. All of it had been in my vault for years, collected silently during my first life, when I had started noticing the gaps, the rumors, the hush money. I just never got the chance to act on it. Till now. Victor's face disappeared from the company website by 8 a.m. By 11 o'clock, the emergency shareholder meeting was in session. I was invited back. Not begged, but asked with a humility that couldn't be faked. Mrs. Blackwood, Paul Reiner, the general manager, said solemnly, "We failed to protect your father's legacy." "No," I replied. "You failed to protect your people." He looked down ashamed. "I'll return," I said, "but only as interim chair. I won't stay long." Whispers filled the room. I raised a hand. "This isn't about power. It's about correction. We will clean this house, publicly, thoroughly, and legally. Do you all understand me?" Everyone nodded. Except one older board member who muttered, "And Victor's shares?" I smiled coldly. They were never his to begin with. Victor's world collapsed with a speed only a guilty man fears. The headlines read like a public execution. Blackwood CEO accused of violence, sexual misconduct. Board votes to strip Victor Blackwood of all authority. Anonymous whistleblower reveals internal corruption at Blackwood Holdings. Anonymous, but not invisible. I signed the internal investigations under the name MB, in firm, confident strokes. Meanwhile, Caleb drifted like a ghost through the house. He didn't ask questions. He didn't cry. But the light in his eyes had dimmed. I found him sitting on the back steps one night staring into the yard. "She lied to me," he said, his voice quiet. "For years. And I believed her." I sat beside him. "That doesn't make you foolish. It makes you good." He shook his head. I kept thinking, if I had been more present, more suspicious, maybe I could have. "No," I said firmly. "You loved with a clean heart. That is nothing to regret." He looked down at his hands. "What happens to the baby?" I was silent for a moment. Then, "He'll be adopted." Caleb turned, startled. "You're giving him away?" "He's not yours. Not mine. And I don't want him used as a pawn ever again." He was quiet. "I've arranged for a family upstate to take him. No press. No photos. No scandal." He nodded slowly. "I don't want to see him again," he said finally. And I understood. A week later, Alyssa's condition worsened. Infection. Blood loss. Trauma-induced seizures. She was declared brain dead. Victor's last co-conspirator was gone. The police had placed Victor on a national manhunt list, but I knew men like him. He wasn't smart enough to vanish, just cunning enough to lie low. He would try to run, but not far. Sure enough, 2 weeks later he showed up. It was evening, just past sundown. I was returning home from a jog, breath slow, pulse steady, my mind clearer than it had been in years. And there he was. Victor stood beneath the porch light, gaunt and wild-eyed, in a wrinkled coat, with dirt on his hands and weeks of stubble on his face. "Miriam," he said, stepping forward. I didn't stop walking. "You need to help me." I paused only because the absurdity nearly made me laugh. "You're out of your mind," I said coolly. "You've always had connections," he pleaded. "You could get me out of the country. Thailand. South Africa. Canada. Anywhere." I tilted my head. "What makes you think I'd lift a finger to help you?" His face twisted. "Because I loved you." I barked a laugh. "Is that what you call poisoning me and screwing my daughter-in-law?" "I made mistakes," he said desperately. "But I never stopped loving you. You tried to kill me." "I was lost," he shouted. "Emma, Alyssa, she tricked me. She's brain dead because of you." He stepped forward again. "I swear, if you just help me disappear, I'll never bother you again." I held up a hand. "Do you want to know what's really funny, Victor?" He blinked. "I spent 30 years believing that somewhere deep inside you was a man I could love." I smiled. "Turns out there was only a man I could destroy." That was when the sirens lit up the street. He turned. Too late. Police cars blocked both ends of the lane. Officers poured out. I had called them 30 seconds after spotting him. And planted a GPS tag in the rose bushes beside the porch. Victor stared at me, rage and panic and disbelief flooding his face all at once. You did this?" "Yes," I said softly. "This time I made the first move." He lunged. The officers tackled him to the ground before he reached me. I watched as they cuffed him, read him his rights and dragged him toward the car. He screamed the whole way down. And I watched. Unblinking. The next day I finalized the adoption papers. The baby would be sent to a distant, private family, one far from headlines and inheritance claims. I didn't do it for him. I did it to end the cycle. At Blackwood Holdings, the rebranding was underway. Dozens of new hires. New policies. Employee protection. Transparency. They offered me a permanent seat. I declined. "I'm not here to build anymore," I said. "I'm here to cleanse." And when that was done, I sold my shares. Every last one. The mansion, cold and echoing, was too full of ghosts. So I sold it too. I bought a small farmhouse in the countryside instead. I started gardening. I joined a local dance group. I ran every morning at dawn, letting the wind carry away the last traces of grief. 1 year later, during a health checkup, my doctor blinked at the chart. You've improved remarkably, he said. Your heart's stronger than it's been in 20 years. I smiled. He didn't know that revenge was the best therapy I had ever known. The mansion was too quiet now. No footsteps in the hallway. No crying baby. No lingering scent of Victor's cologne or Alyssa's rosewater perfume. Just silence and shadows. Each room echoed with memory. The nursery once filled with lullabies and Caleb's soft laughter. The master bedroom where I had swallowed poison with trust still in my heart. The study locked for years where Victor whispered sins into the dark. I stood in the foyer and let the silence wash over me. I wasn't mourning anymore. I was saying goodbye. Are you sure? Caleb asked as we packed boxes together. This place, it's everything you built. No, I said softly. It's everything I survived. He fell quiet. I placed a framed photo into a padded bag, one of the few I had chosen to keep. It was a picture of Caleb at 17, grinning with braces, arms slung around my neck. The last year I remembered him carefree. Before the lies. Before the marriage. Before Victor sank his claws into all of us. I don't want anything from this house to follow me into what's next, I said. Not even the wallpaper. He chuckled, a small one. Fair. It's always been hideous. I smiled, though it didn't quite reach my eyes. Caleb had made his decision too. He had applied for a postgraduate program abroad, quietly without telling me until the acceptance letter arrived. I need distance, Mom, he'd said one evening on the porch. From this city. From the whispers. From the wreckage. I had nodded, swallowing the ache. I understand, I said. And I did. He had been raised in a house of illusions. He deserved to breathe without the weight of our name pressing down on his shoulders. Go, I told him. Live. Learn. And don't come back unless it's for joy. He hugged me tighter than he had in years. The baby's adoption went through quietly. The couple I had chosen lived 2 states away. Warm, quiet people with no desire for fame or fortune. They didn't ask questions when I handed them the final documents and asked them to raise the boy as their own. He didn't know me. He wouldn't remember me. And I was glad. I didn't want his first years tangled in scandal and grief. Let him be someone else's second chance. I sold the mansion 2 weeks later. Real estate agents came in with gloves and clipboards, remarking on the charming bones and historical architecture. They didn't know that every tile had heard a secret. That the chandelier above the dining table had once swung gently while Victor and Alyssa plotted my death. They asked me if I wanted to keep anything. No, I said. Not even the piano, one of them asked. Especially not the piano, I replied. The farmhouse was small and nestled at the edge of a sleepy village. The air smelled of lavender and freshly turned earth. The windows overlooked sunflower fields. The neighbors waved when I passed but didn't pry. And at night when the wind howled, it carried no voices from my past, only the sound of leaves and freedom. I planted a garden. Tomatoes, carrots, hydrangeas, snapdragons. My hands became calloused. My back ached. My skin darkened under the sun. I had never felt more alive. During one of my weekly checkups, the doctor blinked at my chart. Your heart's stronger than ever, he said, flipping the page. Cholesterol's perfect. Blood pressure's the envy of 20-year-olds. I smiled. Must be the spinach. Or maybe it was the absence of poison. The days became slower. I woke with the sun, walked to the lake, read old poetry on the porch, and drank tea from a chipped mug I bought at a yard sale. The villagers began inviting me to local dances. Potlucks. Garden clubs. I said yes sometimes. I didn't want to hide anymore, but I didn't want to explain either. Just a retired widow, I'd say. That was all they needed to know. One afternoon, as we gathered at the square for the Mother's Day celebration, the women shared stories about their children. My daughter sent me chocolates, one said proudly. My son wired me money and called from 3 time zones away, another added. They turned to me. And you, Miriam? Did Caleb remember? I smiled, pressing a hand to my scarf as the spring breeze rustled my hair. He sent his gift early, I said. A letter. And a photo from the Alps. They nodded approvingly. No one asked more. At night, I sometimes sat by the window watching fireflies blink in the fields. I'd think of the years I spent trying to survive, how love and loyalty had nearly killed me. I thought of Victor, rotting in a cell stripped of every ounce of power. I thought of Alyssa, trapped in her own body until the end. I thought of Caleb learning to live without their shadows. And I thought of myself, no longer the woman in silk who poured tea with shaking hands. Now I was a woman with dirt under her fingernails and sun on her shoulders. And peace in her chest. A year passes quietly when no one is trying to kill you. I used to think that time dulled pain. But that's not true. Time just creates distance, and in that space you get to choose what you carry forward. I chose peace. My garden had bloomed early that year. Wild lavender crept along the stone path. Birds had built a nest just above the porch awning. The village children stopped by sometimes to ask for lemons or stories. And the sky at dusk, God, the sky, looked like it had forgiven everything. I still heard from Caleb. Not often but enough. Letters. Occasional video calls. Postcards from Iceland, then Zurich, then Morocco. He always ended with, "Love you, Mom." And I always responded with, "Come home when your heart is ready." He was healing. He was learning how to be his own man, not Victor's shadow. And that was all I had ever wanted for him. It was the end of May, just after sunset. I was coming back from a walk, sweat beading on my neck, the cane I sometimes carried clacking softly against the dirt road. The porch light was already on. A figure stood beneath it, his head bowed slightly, suitcase at his side. He turned when he heard my footsteps. The sun-kissed skin. Slight stubble on his jaw. A canvas backpack slung over his shoulder and eyes that carried less weight than before. My breath caught. "Hey," he said simply. I stepped forward and cupped his face in my hands. The first thing I noticed was how warm his cheeks were. The second was the crack in his voice when he whispered, "I missed you." I smiled, brushing my thumb over the edge of his cheek. "Let's go home." Inside, the fireplace was already lit. The smell of rosemary lingered from dinner. I poured him tea while he looked around the cozy little living room. "You kept the scarf," he said, nodding to the one draped over a chair. "Your Mother's Day gift," I said. "Of course." He smiled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I wasn't sure if you'd want me to come back." "I never wanted you to leave," I replied gently. "But I understood why you had to." We sat together for a long while, not speaking, just breathing the same air again. Caleb eventually leaned back on the sofa, arms stretched over the cushions, eyes closed. "I've been thinking about Dad," he said softly. I didn't respond. I let the silence invite the words forward. "He was always angry, wasn't he? Even when I was a kid? I just thought that's how men were." I nodded slowly. "I thought the same once." "I don't hate him anymore," Caleb admitted. "I thought I would. But what he did, what he was, that doesn't have to live inside me." Tears pricked my eyes. "You're a better man than he ever was," I said. He looked over at me. "That's because I was raised by you." We spent the next few days as if we had been doing it for years. He helped me plant summer squash, fixed a few roof tiles, taught me how to use my phone's calendar app, properly this time. He even joined me at the village dance one evening, awkward in his dress shoes but grinning when the local baker's daughter dragged him into a waltz. For the first time in years, we were no longer mother and son surviving trauma together. We were just mother and son. One night as we stood outside looking at the stars, Caleb asked, "Do you regret it?" "What?" "Not leaving earlier. Not running away." I shook my head. "I stayed to protect you," I said. "And then I stayed to finish what I started. If I had left, you would have been alone with them." He nodded, quiet. "I used to wish I could go back and change it all," I admitted. "But now, I wouldn't." He turned to me confused. "Why?" "Because I got to see you come back whole." As summer rolled in, the days stretched long and golden. My body felt light. My thoughts weren't laced with poison anymore. The baby, no longer ours, was living safely with his new family. The papers were sealed. There was no inheritance, no claims, no connection left. Victor had finally been sentenced, 12 years with no possibility of parole. Alyssa passed quietly in the care of the state. No funeral. No legacy. Blackwood Holdings had moved on. It was someone else's empire now. And I was no longer the widow people pitied. I was the woman who had walked through fire again and again and come out made of stone and sunlight. One evening, as fireflies lit up the garden and the world hummed with life, Caleb brought out a camera. "Smile," he said. I frowned. "Why?" For me. I smiled. Genuinely. He looked at the photo on the screen, then turned it toward me. There she is, he said. Who? The woman who finally came home to herself. The end.